All right, looks like it's 3 o'clock, up to 82 participants now. So for those of you that attended the last Zoom session that I held, this will kind of be a little bit of overlap from that, but we're going to focus on the security best practices. So if you're using this in a classroom setting, but a lot of what I'm going to show you today will be applicable to any meeting that you might be holding. And as I go through the presentation here today, if you have any questions, feel free to unmute yourself and ask and interrupt, and we'll go from there. So I do have a Google slide deck that I shared in the chat. I'm going to use that to kind of guide the presentation today, but that's a resource that you can refer back to. And as I go through, if you want me to demonstrate anything particular, like I said, just feel free to interrupt. All right. All right, can everybody see the Google slide deck on my screen that I'm sharing?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Great.
Mine's,
Okay.
John, mine's partly cut off. Is that because of my big monitor?
Could be. I don't know. Is everybody else able to see the full screen?
Yes.
Yeah. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. So Eric shared a PDF file that had some of this information in it. So I use that as a basis to build out this presentation, and added some screenshots and some other things to it. So that's where some of this is coming from. You may, if you've already looked at that document, you'll see a lot of the same here. So one of the things that is important is the parental consent. So, whoops, I did not mean to go to the next slide yet. So as part of the terms of service for Zoom, a student, anyone under the age of 18, really can't create their own account. I have some additional slides on that, but you really should have consent from a parent before children under the age of 18 are using Zoom. So that brings me to my next slide here. The ways to kind of get around that, if you will, would be to either provide them with accounts or have them join your Zoom session as a guest. Obviously, it'd be preferable if you could create accounts for them, and then you would know who is actually joining your session. And as a part of that, if you go to that extent, you can enable the option that's shown in the image here to only allow authenticated users. So they would have to sign into Zoom before they would be able to join your meeting. Additionally, if we are providing student devices, and this is more applicable to school districts, but if we had a device in the student's hands and we're able to do so, we could lock down the Zoom client and only allow users to join meetings from a particular account. All right, if we do so and require sign in to attend a meeting, this is the screen that the user will see if they try to join and they're not signed into Zoom. So basically their only option is either sign in or to leave at that point. If you want to, you can enable registration for a meeting, and doing so will only allow approved participants to join. So if you enable that option, you will see this. So there will be a registration URL. So prior to joining the meeting, any attendee would have to go there to register. And then you would see in the Manage Attendees a list of anyone who has registered. and then you could either manually approve them or do so automatically. Those are the two options that were shown. You also have some additional options. So you can receive an email notification whenever anyone registers using that link, so then you know whether or not you want to manually approve them if you have that option set. And also under the questions tab, you can capture specific information from any of the registrants. So if you want to know what their job title is or phone number or anything like that, you could do so. And then you can also add your own custom questions. Now, as far as security best practices, you will see some options, and the options that are shown here are in settings, which I'll demonstrate a little bit later. These are the defaults, I believe. So you have your personal meeting ID, which I showed in the last Zoom training that I held. This is kind of a static number, or you can create your own personalized one. But that, if you make it publicly available, anybody can join that particular, and can join your session. And if you have the join before host options, that let me manage my participants here. If you okay, let's, I can't get to the, here we go. No. I'm going to stop my screen share for just a second.
You are. You're my baby. You're.
Okay. That inevitably happens at every meeting at some point. So I'll cover how to do this later, but it's a powerful thing to be able to mute everyone. Okay, so once you set up your meeting ID, ideally, whenever you create a new Zoom meeting, you want to have that automatically generated so that no random person might happen to get an ID that you used previously. It just makes it a little bit harder to get there. Also, you can require a password as an additional layer of security. So these are the password settings. Also, whenever you, once you've scheduled a meeting, you can set it at that level. But this needs to be done prior to creating a new meeting. And once you set these in the settings, when you log into your account, these are the default settings for any new meeting that you create. Any questions thus far?
Why can't I see his screen?
Don, are you sharing your screen? Because I'm not seeing it.
Oh, you know what? Hold on. Let's try that again. Yeah, sorry about that. I disabled my screen share to be able to unmute some folks, or to mute some folks. So let's jump back in here. All right, so this is the screen that I was attempting to show you. These are, again, the password settings that you can enable prior to scheduling a meeting. You have the ability to create an instant meeting, which if you're signed into your account, you can just say start meeting now. One of the interesting options is the one at the bottom here, which, there we go. You can embed the password in the link, so it can be secured, but only the folks that you've shared that meeting link with, would have that. So it's a way to secure it, but yet not make it more of a hassle for folks to join. Okay, the managing participants screen, I'll show this in a little bit more depth in a bit here, but these are some of the things that the host or co-host can control. So you've seen how I have muted participants. You can request that somebody unmute themselves. I don't really see the benefit in that you also have the control just to simply do it for them. And you can control their video and also prevent or enable them to share their screens. These are also all settings that you can set the default behavior for in your account. Putting a participant on hold, I'll cover a little bit more later. If you want to hear a sound when somebody enters or exits, you can do that. And also speak about locking a meeting in just a bit. There's a link there if you want to see some other screenshots or even a video on how to do some of this as well. So these are the screen sharing options. So during the meeting, you have the ability to, and I'll show you that when I go back to Zoom, where you see share your screen, there's an arrow, you can click advanced options, and then you can set who is able to share. You can also change the default behavior once again in your settings if you log into Zoom on a web browser. If you are using this in a classroom setting, this is something that could be important. So if you have a random person that joined, or maybe you have somebody that's being disruptive in your classroom setting, you can go to that person in the participants list, and if you hover over them, you'll see the either mute or unmute or more. And under more, you have the ability to click remove, and that will boot them from the Zoom session. Now, it's important to know that if you don't have the meeting locked, that person will be able to rejoin. If you want to prevent that, again, under Manage Participants at the bottom, or depending on how you have it configured, you'll see more next to unmute all, and then you have the lock meeting option. So once you do that, no new participants will be able to join the meeting. So kind of be careful with that setting. It's not something you use all the time, but even if they have the password, they won't be able to get it. Waiting room is another option that you can use. If you want to enable that, you do that in settings, and you can use the waiting room for just guests or for everyone. So if somebody is logged into Zoom, if you have guest participants only selected, they'll be allowed in, but everybody else will be in the waiting room. And then the host controls, whether they get admitted into the Zoom session or not. And you can do that all at once or one by one. The attendee on hold option, again, you need to enable this in settings for it to show up in your controls if you're hosting a meeting. And a number of the options that you'll see on my screen are typically not there by default. So if you don't see those things, you may need to enable those. But what this will do is this will disable what you're broadcasting as far as audio and video as a host to a particular participant or group of participants. So, as an example of when you might use something like this, if, let's say you were holding a job interview or something, and, partway through the process, you want to discuss how that's going, but the interviewee not to be able to hear what you're talking about, you can put them on hold and then have a discussion, that type of thing. All right, so again, you can disable or enable audio. This is how you do that. You'll see a mute all or unmute all, and then under each individual person that you see listed, you can also individually click on the microphone to mute them or the camera to enable or disable their video. One of the options here that is helpful is the mute participants on entry. So if you do not want to have to keep managing that, if you set that as people join the session, they will be muted by default. And if you don't want them to be able to unmute themselves, you can choose that option here as well. Private chat, or just chat settings in general. If you click on the chat icon, you'll be able to see the conversations going on. What you're seeing there is typically the public chat. If you're using this in a classroom setting, I would recommend making everything public and disabling the private chat option. If you have the private chat enabled, you could have two students kind of having their own little chat amongst themselves, and that can be distracting. By default, file transfers are disabled. That's could be something that's useful if you want to enable it to be able to have someone upload a file. This is something you can do in the settings. And if you want to restrict it to specific types, say you only want to be able to upload a Word doc, an Excel file, or a PDF, you can enter multiple file extensions there. That way you prevent people from just uploading just random images or those kind of things. Annotations, you should see controls on your screen that will allow you to mark up the screen. If I wanted to, I could use that as well. If I click annotate, I can draw on the screen. That may or may not be distracting, so you can, yeah, I see we got some hearts here, perfect. So you can enable or disable that if you like. And then as a host, you have the ability to clear those out or disable them once. So right here, if you can see my screen, apologize, just some traffic. I can disable participant notifications, and then you won't be able to do that anymore. Also, what you can do here is show the names of people who are making the annotation. So some, especially in where you have students involved, they write something inappropriate or draw something inappropriate, you can see who did that and then handle that appropriately. And this last one is one that could come into play when you have students involved. I enabled this on this meeting, so all of you, when you joined, you should have saw something similar to what is in the image there, asking you to consent to be recorded. If you didn't agree, you weren't able to join. And I am recording this session, so I can make that available if you need to see that later on. And then you'll see below what some of those options are if you want to ask before the recording starts or not. Okay, so let me exit out of this and I will bring up Zoom. All right, so let me pause here and just ask if there are any general questions. I will demonstrate how to do some of this and show you where these options exist. But let me just, actually, let me look at the chat because I see there's some questions here. Let me address those first. All right, so Sue said you didn't see the link to the slide deck. Is that the case for anyone else? It's possible I may have shared it in the chat before everyone joined. If you don't see it there, I'll provide it again at the in just a bit, but it should be on the Outlook invitation as well. Okay, so I see a little yes, yes, yes. Yep. Okay, so let me go ahead and post that here for you. Oh, I see. Let me make sure I'm posting this to everyone. And here, if you can see my screen, this is where you can do private chatting back and forth. And you'll see, if you look at my chat, you'll see that when Sue, or well, even Mariana, she messaged me privately. So you'll see that highlighted. All right, does everybody see the link to the slide deck now? You'll have to unmute yourself. Yeah, I'll unmute.
Yeah, that's it. On the iPad to flash it.
I'm muting everyone once again.
Yeah, like. No. Mom.
And it does take a little bit of time sometimes for that muting to occur, or unmuting, if you have a large number of people in a room. We have 103 in here now, so you'll see how that works. Any other general questions?
John, this is Sue Soltis. There's a question from Marissa in the chat. She says, if you are co-hosting with someone, is there a way to keep them unmuted if you choose to mute all participants? She did a training yesterday and she had to keep unmuting the co-host.
Okay, I see that here now. I'm not aware of anything that addresses that specifically. That's a really good point. I'll have to research that and see if I can determine that. But yeah, I believe the co-host is just, they're just viewed as another participant. All right, any other quick questions? Oh, I see one comment is you could possibly use the webinar setting. I believe that is available to us. And somebody else also asked, is it typical to see the person you're chatting with freeze? Well, it depends a lot on your internet connection. If you don't have a high-speed connection, or if it's kind of sporadic, that is somewhat typical. Also, if it's a large meeting, that could happen more frequently as well. Right now, with the issues that we have going on in the world, a lot of people are using Zoom. I actually saw the other day that they've disabled some of the high quality video settings for large meetings. So by default, it puts it in standard definition instead of high definition. That could possibly help if you're able to utilize that. All right, so I'm gonna minimize this for just a minute. And oops, I guess I can't. I need to switch screens. All right, so I showed you this in the last Zoom meeting if you attended, but to get to some of those settings that I showed in the slide deck, you'll need to go to zoom.us and log in with your IU email address and password. And once you're logged in, you'll probably see your profile by default. If you want to change your image, that's one thing that I did recently before this meeting. You can do so here, and then that will show if you don't have your video enabled. But if you click on settings on the left, here you will see your default settings for new meetings that you create. So if by default you want to have video enabled for yourself or participants, you can set that here. Anything that is not default that you've changed, you'll see over here to the right, it says modified, and you can reset it to the default. The join before host, a lot of times this can be helpful. If you're using it in a classroom setting, I would advise not enabling that, because what that will do is that will allow students to use your link to just, if you don't have a password or any other type of protections there, to just chat amongst themselves. Now, you will get an email typically that will let you know that there are folks in your meeting waiting on you, so you'll know that that's happening. And then most of these other settings I already showed in the slide deck, but anything else that requires mention, I'll I'll go over here quickly. So here's where you can mute participants upon entry by default. That might be a good one to do. That is, I believe, a default setting. If you want to allow folks to chat or not, you can turn that off. Anyone can save the chat. If you want to prevent them from doing so, you can. Private chat, typically in a classroom setting, here's where you would want to disable that. And if you want to save a transcript of the chat, you can enable that option. These are the file transfer settings. So here, the co-host by default has the same controls as anyone else. I was hoping maybe we'd see something here to answer Marissa's question, but I don't see it. So polling I have enabled, so whenever I have some options for, you know, if I want to have a poll at the end of a survey, that type of thing, you can do that. I just did it as an example. You know, on hold settings, this is the one that allows me to be able to show you my controls. So I enabled this actually before the last meeting. However, I had the Zoom application installed on my desktop, so it has its own set of settings that kind of override that. So that's one thing to bear in mind. If you have the Zoom client, which, can everybody see this? I know last time they weren't able to.
I see it.
Yes.
Okay. So here you have, if you click on your avatar here, you can go to settings. So some of these settings are similar to what are on the website, but if you have these set differently, the way that I've seen it, it overrides those settings. So here, if I do want to show my Zoom windows during a screen share, this is where I had to check that option to make that work. All right, here are the defaults for who can share their screen. If you want to disable that, you can do so. Again, with Annotations, Whiteboard. Remote control is an important one. So if you have this option enabled, I can give somebody else the control to control my mouse on my computer and do certain things. So if you have a co-host or something, that can be helpful. If you're using this in a classroom setting, you probably don't want to give your students that level of access. The nonverbal feedback, that is, let's see if I can bring that up here to show you. So that's what this little bar here is. So if you want somebody to, if I ask a question and just wanted, if I click yes, then I'll see next to that person, I'll see an icon I can kind of go down through the list to see if anyone said yes or no. It also gives people to kind of give you some feedback here. If you have this window open, they want you to go slower or faster, or if they need a break, they can put the little coffee cup symbol here. And if you had to leave the room for some reason, you want to say that you're away, you can do that. But that's something that's not enabled by default. So if you want to allow that, then you need to enable this nonverbal feedback. So here is the option to allow removed participants to rejoin or not. If you want to create breakout rooms, you can do so. Remote support, this is something you also would not want to have enabled for students. It's mainly meant to provide control for your computer. Marissa, you asked previously about closed captioning. So this is where you can enable this. Again, this is not enabled by default. You can also choose whether you want to save those captions. the way that works is, go back to the Zoom here. So if you have it enabled, you'll see this closed caption here. And if I click on this, I can assign a person to type in the closed captioning. Or if you subscribe to a third-party solution that does that automatically, you can put an API key here and to enable that. I will say, if that's something that's important to you, I don't know if David's on the Zoom here or not, but when he demoed the Teams screen sharing capabilities, that is something that's provided by default, and it does a pretty good job of providing that closed captioning. So that's another option for you. If you want to allow people to change their backgrounds, you can do that here. Waiting room settings. Well, actually, let me go back here. So attention tracking. If you kind of want to spy on people and see if they're actually paying attention to you. I've never really used that before, but supposedly there's supposed to be an indicator here. I think it's this little, if you can see, it's real tiny there. So it looks like Lisa's not paying attention to me. So what that means is that that person doesn't have Zoom in the forefront of their, they have some other tab or window open. So if you are using this in a classroom, you want to make sure that everybody is actually watching and paying attention, then you can use that as an indicator. Waiting room, again, we covered those settings. And then there's some email notification things. So that covers most of the settings that you'll see here. One other one, the recording. This is where you would set the consent. Go down here. So here, this is that disclaimer, if you want folks to consent to you recording them or not. All right, I believe that covers just about everything that I wanted to show you. I'll open it up now for another round of questions. Let me see if we have any in the chat. Okay. All right, Sarah asked, she has an image in her profile, and it's not showing right now. She just sees her name. That's a good question. I'm not sure why. If you are not signed into your account when you join the meeting, I believe that's why it would just show your name. All right. Mariana sent me something about co-hosting, so I'll review that and I can get that back to you, Marissa. And yes, I see Sue mentioned about closed captioning. Okay, any other questions that weren't in the chat? Okay, Candace brought up a good point. If you've just now updated your picture while you're already in the meeting, she's correct. It won't show until you join the next meeting. So that could possibly be the issue there.
Thanks, John. I've had that picture show up before. It just didn't show up in yours right now. So I wasn't sure if I was doing something, if it was like the number of participants or you had turned it off or anything like that, because it has shown up before and isn't right now.
Yeah, no, I'm not aware of anything that changed on my end.
Okay.
Something we can look into though and follow up.
Okay, that's fine. I'll check and see at other times if it still works.
All right, so Sue asked about the third-party closed captioning, if I had a recommendation. I've not really looked into that. I can explore that a little bit further, but as far as how you get the API key, it depends on what the service is. So typically, that's an application programming interface, the technical term there, but they would create the account. They would have somewhere there where you can get that and you copy and paste that key. All right, any other questions? All right, if not, wait, let's see. Where will I post the recording? Okay, I will, that's a good question. I will put it on Google Drive. As far as how do I get that link out to all of you, I'll see if Eric's okay with me just sending out that as an email. I can also share the slide deck there as well. So most likely I'll just send that out in an email. All right, I guess that's it for me. If you do have any questions or run into anything, feel free to email me or reach out. All right, well, thanks everyone for attending, and again, let me know if you have any other issues.
Thanks, John.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, enjoy your week, guys.
You too.
All right, bye-bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.